Greetings, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Beek. I coordinate adult education programs here at Trees Atlanta, and we're so excited you're here with us today to learn more about the invasive spotted lanternfly that is now in Georgia. We'll be doing this with UGA Extension. Trees Atlanta's mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forests by planting, conserving, and educating. We invite you to learn more about our work by visiting our website, which is linked below. We also would love to give a thanks to the City of Atlanta. They give us continued support for Trees Atlanta and all of our urban forest education. This program and so many others is made free and accessible to others through City of Atlanta. And if you have any questions today, we invite you to open the Q&A, which is on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and submit the questions. During today's Q&A session, Reagan is a Trees Atlanta staff person who's working with me today, will be going through those questions and we'll be answering those live. The recording for today's event is going to be made available on our YouTube channel at YouTube Trees Atlanta, and we'll also be sending out a survey. We would love it for you to give us your feedback. This helps us present programs that better serve you. And please sign up for our newsletters and follow us on social media. We have so many great events that are coming up, and we'd love you to be included. These are just a few of some really great ones. Our native plant sale, our online shop is opening tomorrow. We have a really fun event next week in partnership with Story Collider and Atlanta Science Fest, which will be stories about trees. I think it will be a really wonderful and fun one to come to. And then we also have a great speaker coming towards the end of the month who will be speaking about the ecological garden and gardening with nature. And today's speaker, I'm so excited to introduce. Many of you all already know and get to work with the amazing Gabrielle LaTora. She is the natural resource agent at UGA Extension. She's an entomologist by training. I've personally called her and asked her about so many things. She's very interested in farms and gardens, and she's very passionate about closing the gap between people and food here in Atlanta. As an extension agent, she works with farmers to help make production more sustainable and more profitable. She also coordinates the Fulton County's Master Garden Extension Volunteer Program, and she oversees the North Fulton County Community Garden. She answers so many questions about gardening and natural resources and creates great educational programs for Fulton County residents, such as the one today. And her favorite insect, which I encourage you all to Google right now, I just did it, it's incredible, is the Pandora Sphinx moth. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. All right, let me share my screen.
And I'm just trying to unshare mine.
Sure. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. Being an extension agent is probably the coolest job ever, and I love it. I remember when I was in grad school for entomology, my parents said, "What are you going to do with this degree?" And I said, "I'm not sure, but it'll be something cool." So now here I am. Okay, so let me do some stuff. All right. We're here talking about spotted lanternfly today. As Beek mentioned, my name is Gabrielle LaTora. I'm an agriculture and natural resources agent for UGA Extension's Fulton County office. And if you're not familiar with Extension, we are essentially the science translators for the University of Georgia, which is one of two land-grant universities here in Georgia. And while I'm on the agriculture and natural resources team, we also have two other program areas in Extension. We've got family and consumer sciences that it used to be called home economics. So they deal with everything inside the home, things like financial planning, nutrition. They even do some stuff on radon, lots of different things. And our third program area is 4-H, which many of you may be familiar with. And essentially our 4-H agents take all of the programming and information from the agriculture and natural resources program area and family and consumer sciences and translate that for a youth audience. So they are our youth development arm, and together the three program areas make up every county extension office, and we have an extension office in every state in every county in the state of Georgia, which is pretty cool. So we're here as a public service to you to answer your questions, to consult with you, to provide educational programs, all types of stuff. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. If you don't know who to contact, just contact one of us and we'll point you in the right direction. And University of Georgia receives funding from USDA. So we offer all of our programs, our consultation, our resources to all people without regard to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, or veteran status. And we're an equal opportunity organization. So it's a privilege to be able to work for UG Extension. So let's talk about spotted lanternfly. Probably you're here because either you already know something about spotted lanternfly or you've heard some stuff and want to know more. So here's our insect that we're talking about today. This is the guy. The scientific name of this insect is Lycorma delicatula. It's a hemipteran. It's in the order Hemiptera, which we call our true bugs. So hemipterans, this order includes cicadas, stink bugs, shield bugs, assassin bugs, wheel bugs, one of my faves, leaf hoppers, plant hoppers, tree hoppers. If you've never seen a tree hopper, as soon as this thing is over, Google tree hopper. They are some of the coolest insects out there. But this group also includes some of our most common garden pests. So things like aphids, mealybugs, and whiteflies are also hemipterans. Spotted lanternfly is in the family Fulgoridae. So these are the largest plant hoppers that we have on Earth. This family is distributed all around the world. This insect in particular is temperate, but there are some really cool tropical species of Fulgorids. And something kind of interesting that I discovered when I was looking into Fulgorids is that a couple hundred years ago, Western entomologists came across some specimens in a collection somewhere of tropical Fulgorids, and they had some big projections on the front of their heads, like big, growths in their exoskeleton. And these entomologists assumed that these projections would be able to bioluminesce or light up. And so they kind of gave them the common name lanternflies, but these entomologists had never seen these insects alive in their native habitat. And it turns out that they cannot bioluminesce that part of their head. That's not a thing. But the common name lanternfly stuck. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's where that name comes from. So this species, Lycorma delicatula, is a type of plant hopper. It's in this large plant hopper family, and it's a phloem feeder. So it uses its mouth parts, which are shaped like a needle. We call it a stylet. They use that to puncture trees and other plants and suck out the phloem. That's the fluid that's coming down from the leaves, transporting carbohydrates and photosynthate down into the rest of the plant. So this is a really sugary, carbohydrate-rich solution that they're sucking up out of the plant. This species in particular has a really wide host range. And when I say host range, that means all of the different types of plants that it will feed on. So some Fulgorids are really specific on what plants they will feed on. These guys are really generalists in terms of what they will feed on. So across the world, they have been documented to feed on over 100 species of plants. In the US, they've been documented to feed on 56 different plant species, which is a lot. And something else that's a little bit unique for this group is that within this 56 species, it includes both woody plants as well as herbaceous plants, vines, grasses, all types of stuff. So they really are generalists in the true sense of the word. Even though they will feed on a ton of different plants, they do have one preferred host, which is tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. This species is native to parts of East and Southeast Asia. The full extent of its native range is not completely known. We do know that it is an invasive pest in South Korea of some palm fruits, apple crops, and grapes. But it's native to areas of China, Japan, and Vietnam, and is not considered a pest there. So how did it get to the US? It was first detected in the US in Berks County, Pennsylvania in 2014. They think that it came in as an egg mass on a shipment of landscaping stone from China. So we'll talk about the egg masses later and how this insect gets spread around. But at that point, APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, which is a federal agency, partnered with Pennsylvania's Department of Agriculture on an eradication program. So that between 2014 and 2018, they were implementing this pretty aggressive eradication program in Pennsylvania. But despite their best efforts, it did spread down into the mid-Atlantic actually in those 4 years. And so by the time it got to DC and Virginia, the state departments of ag as well as APHIS kind of shifted their approach from a total eradication program, which means completely get rid of all insects, which if anybody's a gardener in the audience, you know that that's almost impossible. It's very difficult. And so it's not surprising that it was not ultimately successful, but around 2018, these agencies kind of shifted their approach into more of a control program where they are working on suppressing the populations that have established. They're working on stemming the spread and the flow of this insect to keep it from spreading any farther. We still have quarantine regulations in place in several counties and states. It's kind of hard to find that information. You really have to dig into all the reports from all the different states, but if you're interested, we can dig into it. Just shoot me an email. But essentially, they will put high risk cargo into quarantine. They'll be have really aggressive monitoring activities, as well as targeting Tree of Heaven. We'll talk about all that later. So just know that there are a lot of elements to these control programs, a lot of moving parts, and they're working really hard on this. So I think that once it got established in Pennsylvania, there was a big push, big marketing campaign to let people know what this insect is, what to do about it, and how to stop the spread. And I think that ultimately was really successful because by the time it got down into North Carolina, we were already hearing about it in Georgia. Residents already knew about it. I mean, you guys are here because probably you've heard something about it too. And so we really were aware that it was kind of on Georgia's doorstep before it actually got here. And really, with invasive insects, it's very difficult to manage them sometimes. And so we kind of thought, well, it's probably just a matter of time until it's detected in Georgia. So that day did come. We've had 2 confirmed sightings in Georgia so far. We'll talk about that more in a minute too, but they were both in Fulton County. The first reported sighting was in Fulton in October of last year. So let's look at our map. Okay, so the map on the left, this is the full distribution of spotted lanternfly in the US as of December 2024. It does not include Georgia. I'm not sure why. Maybe they'll get it in there, but in blue, those are the areas where there's an established population present, an established infestation. And you probably can't see it super well, but there's little purple dots here and there. Those are individual finds of spotted lanternfly where there's no established population, essentially. So we can see that really it has established in sort of the southern northeast down to the mid-Atlantic, in 2 counties in North Carolina, and across over into the central Midwest. On the left, these are the 2 confirmed sightings in Georgia. So we do not have an established population of spotted lanternfly in Georgia that we know of right now. There have only been 2 confirmed sightings. This map is from edmaps.org. You can see the URL down here, and they have this really cool interactive map tool. That's what I got this screenshot from. And it actually shows a couple other non-confirmed sightings as well as their photos that got submitted. And you can see that the photos are not spotted lanternfly, but they look similar. So that's kind of interesting to see what people submit thinking that it's spotted lanternfly. But so these 2 confirmed sightings that were confirmed by UGA Department of Ag and the Forestry Commission. They've got designated identifiers on their teams that look at these photos and then go out in person and identify them in person. These two confirmed sightings, if you're in the Atlanta area or know about Atlanta, here's Georgia Tech right here. Here's Atlantic Station. So they're just west of these two areas, and they were pretty close together, like within a mile or two. And interestingly, up here, if you see some of these gray dashes, this is a train yard. And so we'll talk about this a little more later, but this insect is very easily spread on cargo, on train cars, on vehicles. And so when I saw that on the map, I was kind of not surprised that these two sightings were right next to this huge train yard in the city. So why are we concerned? What's the big deal? Mainly, these insects are voracious feeders with a very wide host range. And again, host range just means all of the different types of plants that they will feed on. They will feed on fruit trees, including stone fruits, palm fruits, specialty crops. They'll feed on grapes. They're actually a major pest in South Korea and already in some parts of Pennsylvania in wine grapes and table grapes. So they love grapes. They will feed on native trees and plants as well as non-native ornamental trees and plants. So they really will feed on a lot of stuff. And this has implications for our agricultural producers, obviously. When they're getting infestations of these insects, we've got some data from wine grape growers in Pennsylvania that saw the first year they had a heavy infestation, they saw 90% yield loss in their wine grapes. They had to spray 3 times more insecticides to manage this pest, and they still didn't get complete control over it. And the vines declined for years after that. So definitely an agricultural concern. They're also an aesthetic pest. So because they're feeding on sap, which is essentially just sugar water, they are pooping out sugar water, which if anybody has ever had like aphids in the tree canopy over their deck or over their car or other like spring insect pests raining down this sugary poop, which we affectionately call honeydew, it's kind of a euphemism, raining down honeydew, you'll know that your car or your deck, whatever, gets all sticky. And that's a perfect growth medium for sooty mold, which turns black. Very common issue in our landscapes with aphids and other soft-bodied pests, usually hemipterans like spotted lanternfly. But it's an issue for multiple reasons. One, it's an aesthetic problem if we get sooty mold on the understory of our landscape, all over our deck furniture, our car, whatever. That's an aesthetic problem. But from a plant physiology perspective, it's also a problem because we're shading out leaves. If we've got a lot of honeydew coating like the understory plants, we're shading out those leaves from being able to photosynthesize properly. Sooty mold is going to impact photosynthesis and vigor of these plants. And so these are some potential issues from this insect. On top of all that, like most people don't love a big swarm of insects in their landscape, like where they're trying to hang out. And so these insects can be a nuisance to people. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but as adults in the fall, they tend to aggregate in large numbers, like thousands per tree is what we're talking about. And so that's certainly going to have some impacts for outdoor recreation and outdoor enjoyment. Even I, as an insect lover, even I don't really want 1,000 insects like all over the tree next to me necessarily. So yes, this can be a nuisance pest. And then, with all of these things, there are some indirect effects. So if we do see that spotted lanternfly becomes a significant agricultural pest, producers are going to be spraying more insecticides. That's just going to happen. And we know that that's going to have negative environmental effects. It's going to have negative human health effects. And, it's going to cost more for growers in terms of production costs and labor. And we know that farmers already are not working on the highest profit margins out there. And so any additional costs really puts strain on our farmers and on our agricultural sector. And because these insects will feed on our native plants, like from the honeydew and sooty mold issue, that can affect our native system. So it can affect the understory. We've got insects and other animals that rely on understory plants. And something I didn't mention is honeydew attracts wasps and other insects, ants. So we don't want to be attracting a ton of wasps to our landscapes in our areas if we're trying to hang out there necessarily. Um, so just a lot of indirect effects, sort of the butterfly effect, um, pun intended, can happen from having this pest around. So in order to really understand what's going on and to inform our management decisions, we need to know a little bit about the life cycle and the behavior of this pest. So what we know from their native range in East Asia and from what they've been doing in Pennsylvania and the Northeast, we can draw some conclusions. And I want to say a disclaimer of that, that's where these data come from, is those temperate regions. And as this insect moves southward, we don't have a lot of data on how their life cycle, their physiology, and their behavior could change as a result of coming to a warmer climate. So just a disclaimer there. Again, this insect has only been in the US for about 10 years. And in scientific time, that's pretty short. You know, it's not a ton of time for people to be able to design experiments, get funding, and publish those data for us to see in that amount of time. So there's a lot of unknowns. That's my disclaimer. What we do know from this insect's native range and from what it's been doing in the Northeast is that it's univoltine, meaning it has one generation per year. If we start at the beginning of the year, it's overwintering in these egg masses that you can see at the top of the screen. And they're pretty nondescript, right? They're like tan, brownish. They're kind of smeared on lots of different substrates, pretty much anything smooth. The female adult will lay eggs on it. So whether that's a tree, whether that's some cargo or a vehicle or the side of your house or a train car, if it's smooth, she could lay eggs on it. But you can see how it's kind of easy to, if we are monitoring, to overlook these because they're so cryptic. So each one of these egg masses will contain between 30 and 50 eggs on average. And they remain over the winter in these egg masses until late spring. In Pennsylvania, this is like early May. They hatch into these immature insects we call nymphs. So the nymphs go through 4 different molts as immatures. We call these molts instars. So that's what this vocab word is. So they have 4 distinct molts as nymphs. The young nymphs, like once they hatch from this egg, they're in their first instar, their first nymphal stage. They're going to be black with white spots and pretty small. And as they go through the second nymphal instar and the third nymphal instar, they get a little bigger at each of those molts, but they stay black with white spots, kind of like a reverse Dalmatian. And then their fourth nymphal instar, the one right before they become an adult, they get some reddish, where's my mouse? They get some reddish, kind of scarlet red coloration with some black with white spots still, but they're a little bit bigger. And so these guys can't fly as nymphs. They don't have wings. And so all they can do is crawl. Because of that, they can't disperse that far. There have been some lab studies and some what we call semi-field studies that are trying to estimate how far can an individual nymph get on its own. It seems to be between 10 and 20 meters. They will travel throughout all 4 of those instars as nymphs. So not very far. They're pretty much going to be close to wherever the egg mass was laid by their mother. Although if they're laid on like a train car or something, they're going to try to disperse to a suitable host, right? And as they go through these nymphal molts, the plants and trees that they prefer to feed on, that range gets narrower and narrower. So by the time they're a 4th nymph instar, they really only want to feed on like about 10 species of trees. So whether they make it to one of those preferred hosts or not might sort of that might determine their survival and their ultimate success. But anyway, we'll see. But that's kind of an interesting biological type thing. So they're doing this as nymphs. They're feeding on their preferred hosts throughout the summer. And then in early fall, kind of about September in Pennsylvania, maybe late September, they will molt. They'll do their final molt into adults. This is what the adult looks like with its wings spread open. We've already seen some of the images where they have them closed, like holding them like a tent over their back. So when they're at rest like this and they don't have their wings open, they're kind of tan with these black spots and dashes. But then when they open their wings, you can see this flash of scarlet red on the hind wings. So that's something to consider if you're trying to make an identification. But so during the summer, the nymphs, their main objective is just feed, 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 feed. They're just trying to grow into adulthood. As soon as they molt into adults in the early fall, then their priority is mate and lay eggs. That's like their main priority. They'll do some feeding, but they really just want to mate and lay eggs. And because of that, they'll get together and aggregate in these large groups of like thousands of insects on a single tree, because that helps with mating, right? We've got more mates in a smaller area. So that's when we'll see these big aggregations of adults in the fall, but anytime between September and November. And if we think back to our two reported adult sightings, they were both adult spotted lanternflies, and they were in October and November. So that makes sense. We would see adults during that month of the year. Because they have wings, they're able to disperse a lot farther than the nymphs. Again, we don't really know exactly how far an individual can disperse, but we know that an adult spotted lanternfly has no problem flying 40 meters in one bout. So again, we don't know how far they can travel across the entirety of their lifetime, but really they have no problem dispersing into new areas. And in the fall, they're probably doing so in large groups. So I want to talk about their preferred host, tree of heaven. Many of you may be familiar already with this tree. It is a rapidly growing non-native invasive that's spread across the US. It's very common. It's one of our, the invasives that we're trying to remove as much as possible. And like spotted lanternfly, this tree is native to East Asia, to China and Taiwan. It can get up to 80 feet tall, and it spreads with suckers, so it can be pretty aggressive in natural areas. And fun fact, like most of our invasives, it was brought over to the US in the 1700s as an ornamental plant. So great, awesome. In the US, this is spotted lanternfly's most preferred host by far. There are 8 known trees right now in the US that can support spotted lanternflies development from egg to adult in completion. There's only 8 species that they can feed on for the course of their lifetime and successfully molt into an adult. But within those 8 trees, like we'll see 50% of those insects are on tree of heaven. So they really prefer this more than anything else. And because of that, our control programs for spotted lanternfly are definitely going to include tree of heaven and already include management of tree of heaven. So during the eradication programs between 2014 and 2018, APHIS and the Departments of Agriculture of the various states where they found spotted lanternfly were working on eradicating tree of heaven, but they were also using kind of sentinel trees, what they call trap trees, to monitor for spotted lanternflies. So they'll put sticky bands around the trunks of trees of heaven. They'll monitor them frequently. They will also treat them with insecticides. So we can treat these trees with systemic insecticides. And when I say systemic, that means that the plant is able to take up that insecticide and translocate it throughout all of the tissues in the plant. And so when we do that, either through soil drenches on these individual trees, soil or tree injections, or basal bark treatments, the tree takes up that insecticide It doesn't really harm the tree, but once spotted lanternfly is feeding on tree of heaven, it ingests the insecticide, and we see like 90% mortality of the insects that feed on these trees. So this is a really targeted use of insecticides with relatively low non-target effects that is very effective for management of spotted lanternfly. And so the eradication and control programs that continue really rely heavily on this method. So what are some other ways that we can manage spotted lanternfly? In its native range, the spotted lanternfly has two different parasitoid wasps. And if you are not familiar with parasitoid wasps, they're one of my favorites. Very, very cool evolutionary history that we see in nature. And essentially, the parasitoid wasp, the female will lay her eggs in or on a host insect, in this case, spotted lanternfly. The wasp eggs hatch into larvae, and then the larvae feed on the body of the host insect as their primary food source. That's how they develop. And in the process, the host insect dies. And so this is a natural population control that happens all over the place. We've got native parasitoids all over in the US. And so in spotted lanternfly's native range, we have identified two parasitoids, one that targets the lanternfly eggs and one that targets the nymphs. Both of these species are being researched in quarantine in the US right now as potential biocontrol agents. Maybe some of y'all are freaking out, pulling your hair out. Don't worry. There have been disastrous biocontrol releases in the past, but over time we've gotten a lot better at this. And somebody who worked a little bit with, as someone who worked a little bit with classical biological control, I can say we are a lot better at it now. So please don't be concerned. Typical biocontrol agents will go through at least 5 years of host specificity testing, meaning they're testing them to make sure that they only target the thing that we want them to target before they make limited releases of them. So these are being evaluated right now. From what I can find, there's a lot of promise for the egg parasitoid as a potential biological control agent for spotted lanternfly. Aside from these parasitoids, we have documented birds, mammals, fish, predatory insects, and at least 4 entomopathogenic fungi attacking spotted lanternfly here in the US. So our native ecosystems are doing a little bit to suppress these insects as well. It's not like they won't feed on them. So that's positive. By far the most effective and most commonly used control for spotted lanternfly right now is the use of insecticides. So various pyrethroids, neonics, biopesticides, and others are being used in a regulatory context and in agricultural systems to target both spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven, like I mentioned on the last slide. And the last thing that's kind of our major piece of the management puzzle is removing this preferred host, which is tree of heaven. So something that we can do to kind of prevent spotted lanternfly from getting established here in Georgia is to identify and remove tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima, as much as possible. Okay, here's what we don't know. Like I said, this insect has only been in the US for 10 years, so there's a lot of gaps in our knowledge, things that we want to know more about. There have been a lot of studies of spotted lanternfly in laboratory settings and semi-field settings. They've even done some what we call mark release and recapture experiments where they will mark insects, release them, and then recapture them to gain some sort of data from where they went or what they did. But interpolating that information into what they really do out in nature can be a little difficult. And so there are things that we don't know about what they do in the environment. One of those things is what areas in the country are suitable for them to establish. So this map here is from a study in 2020. Actually, I think it was a review paper where they used some modeling tools, some really sophisticated modeling to estimate the potential distribution of spotted lanternfly in the US. So this is the potential for where they could be. In red, these are the most suitable areas. So we can see like this, the south, southern, northeast, and mid-Atlantic over into the central Midwest are really the hot spots, as well as our agricultural areas in California and the wine grape growing areas in the Pacific Northwest. In Georgia, we're in green, so that's a low suitability area. And this is based on the insect's physiology and the climatic conditions of these areas. Why they think Georgia could be low is because it's so hot here. There's been some data that spotted lanternfly doesn't perform as well in hot temperatures. So again, this is from 2020 and it's just estimating, but potentially the climate in Georgia, it could be not very suitable. We don't know. We also don't know, like I said, how far an individual insect can travel from the place where it was, hatched out of its egg mass. So we kind of know limited information from these various studies how far an individual insect will go. But if it's not attached to a train car or a box truck or something, how far can one individual insect disperse? We have yet to see. We also have not identified any attractants or repellents. So, like aggregation pheromones or sex pheromones that we could use to um, sort of manage the behavior of this insect. We don't have those identified yet. We don't have any repellents. So those could potentially be low impact management actions that we can take or products that we can use, but we don't have them yet. And we don't have any idea about whether this insect is developing pesticide resistance. So that's always a risk when we're relying on insecticides to manage an insect pest, that pesticide resistance can develop. And this is a big concern because it makes it very costly, maybe very difficult to manage a pest if it starts to develop resistance. So it'll be interesting to see if we see any of this developing. Okay, this is probably the slide y'all have been waiting for this whole presentation. What do you do if you see spotted lanternfly? So when I made this slide, I wrote monitor tree of heaven trap trees, as well as tall structures or buildings. Since I made this slide, I have talked to one of our specialists, our forest entomologist at Warnell School of Forestry, and she recommended if you see tree of heaven and you are able to remove it, please remove it because there are plenty still out there that we can monitor as trap trees. So maybe if there's a tree of heaven somewhere where you are not able to remove it, maybe in a public park or something, keep an eye on tree of heaven, especially since we're going to see the majority of spotted lanternfly going to those trees. But definitely monitor like the outside of your house. Any other tall structures or buildings, I guess, maybe a light pole, whatever. Just keep your eyes out, know what they look like, know what the egg masses look like, and that will sort of cue you up to be able to recognize it if you happen to see it in nature. Before you do anything, take good photos. For the love of God, take good photos. And when I say good photos, I mean photos that are where the subject, the insect is in focus. I can't tell you how many photos I receive from my wonderful beloved family and friends that say, "What bug is this?" And they're holding an insect in their hand or on a twig or something, and it's completely blurry, but the sidewalk behind the insect in focus completely. I can't do anything with that. Even our experts who are identifying these photos, when you submit them, just make sure your subject is in focus so we can make an accurate identification. Thank you. That's the pedestal that I'm on today. After you've taken some good photos, you want to leave the insect alive. I know that's kind of difficult, but I'll explain that in a minute. So we don't want to be smashing them yet. Then you need to report your sighting. So this QR code will take you directly to the reporting mechanism, or you can go to either of these links. They go to the same place. You can go directly to eddmaps.org. It's called EdMaps. You can report it there. It's really easy. Or you can go to this link here. This is what the QR code goes to, georgiainvasives.org. Even you could even go to gainvasives.org and it's easy to find. But this georgiainvasives.org is populates the information in EdMaps. So they're linked together. You can go to either one. And what happens when you submit something here is that our identifiers at UGA, at Department of Ag, and at the Forestry Commission get a notification. They look at the photos. If they deem, yes, this is spotted lanternfly, they will send some folks out to where you saw it the next day, and try to find that insect and identify it. And really, that's the only way to confirm it right now. They have had some bogus reports. So please don't mess with them. Just report something if you're pretty sure that it's spotted lanternfly. Okay, that's all I have. Again, I'm not trying to freak y'all out. We've only had these 2 reported sightings. They were right next to this train yard, so they probably came in on a train car. We don't have an established population that we know of here in Georgia. Something else that I wanted to mention is that we don't have a public eradication or management plan that has been released by Department of Ag so far. They're planning to release a monitoring program to the public next year for what their plans to monitor are. If it gets to the point where they need an eradication program, Department of Ag and UGA will work together to develop that program and release it to the public. So stay tuned, but stay alert. Now y'all know some of their behavior and what they look like. This, the first QR code on the left, this is our UGA publication on spotted lanternfly. There's a ton of information out there, but definitely go to reputable sources like UGA Extension. Actually, this publication is through Warnell. They're amazing too. So check that out if you want to learn more. And I know Trees Atlanta has their wonderful survey. I also have my own survey, and I humbly ask you to spend 5 minutes to tell me how I did. That information is super useful for me so that I can improve my programming, but also know what you all want to learn more about. So this QR code on the right, this is me humbly asking you to take my survey. And with that, I will take any questions, and I appreciate y'all coming.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. Again, we would love to invite anyone who has any questions at all to go to the Q&A button that is at the bottom of your screen. And you can drop those questions in, and we'll be asking Gabrielle those questions now. We can start with one that we have. So when you see those eggs, and are they laid on a more often very high up on a tree or on a building, or are they kind of anywhere? Where should we be scouting for them?
That is a good question. They can be kind of anywhere, is actually the answer. Something interesting about this insect is that even though their host preference narrows as they get older, to the point where as adults, they really only want to feed on a handful of trees, even in spite of that, the female really will lay her eggs on anything. Like you would think she would want to lay it on the preferred host or one of those hosts that will support the entire development process, but no, she'll lay it anywhere. It's probably going to be, up on a tree trunk somewhere. I wouldn't think that it would be on the ground or like very close to the ground, but really it could be anywhere.
Thank you. And then you had also shared that the nymph, or when they're still young adults, when there's black and white and they can't move very far, is that the best time to try to remove them? I understand that you would want to take a picture before you did anything, but in the future, if we were to see them, would that be the best time to remove them, or is it just any time?
They say the best time to prune a tree is when you have time to do it. The best time to control them is immediately when you see them. But this is my big but. Since we're trying to detect them in Georgia, Department of Ag and UGA and the Forestry Commission don't want us to kill them before they can come out and identify them. So If it gets to the point where we have established populations in Georgia and we've got an eradication campaign, if it gets to that point, you would want to smash them, destroy them as soon as you see them, whether it's in the egg stage, whether they're nymphs, or whether they're adults.
Sounds great.
Oh, and if I
And
can just add, probably the most
yes,
efficient time to control them is in the egg stage before they even hatch into nymphs and start feeding on our native plants, our ornamentals, what have you. But those egg masses are so cryptic, we just might not see them.
and can you remind me again what season or time of year the eggs are most often spotted?
So I don't know when they're most often spotted, but the females are going to lay them in the fall, and then they spend the entire winter as eggs all the way until late spring, like early May is when they're hatching in Pennsylvania. So they're going to be egg masses from, between October and November all the way to May, potentially, maybe a little bit earlier if they become established in Georgia. That that hatch time for nymphs may move a little earlier since we're warmer down here. So maybe like mid-spring or late spring.
Thank you. And then somebody had also asked, and I think this is what you've already covered, that again, if you believe you're seeing one of these lanternflies, the best thing to do is to send that information to you all using those QR codes and make sure that somebody identifies it. And at this stage, that is what we should be doing, in addition to removing trees to heaven and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. We're relying on you all to help us detect them. We are first detectors. And so we absolutely want you to report it using, let me go back, going to one of these websites and reporting it. If you're interested in invasive species, this EdMaps website is really good. It's got interactive maps for a variety of different invasive species, including Joros. If you want to help us document and manage Joros, you can do that there too. But if you're interested in invasives, that's a really good resource. But yes, we need the public to know what these insects look like and to be on board in terms of reporting. The reason that is so that we can identify where they are as soon as possible, and that makes an eradication campaign, it has the best chance of being successful. Eradication is already very difficult, but if we can detect them early before they've had a chance to breed or establish in that area, then we actually do stand a chance of eradicating them locally. So yes, we need you all to report them.
Thank you. And then one last question that I see is, and again, you can keep asking questions, but another one is, how do we identify a tree of heaven more easily? Could you go back to that slide perhaps?
Yes. And I'm not the best tree of heaven identifier in the world. So I know that they've got these compound leaves. They've got an opposite arrangement. I guess they call this pinnately compound. I don't know. I'm trying to think back to my undergrad like botany class. This is what they'll look like when young, and they can be easily confused with potentially like black walnut or maybe one of the sumacs, which I can never keep straight, or some of our hickories, I guess. Once they get really big, this is kind of what they look like. As far as what their margin looks like, I don't know. It kind of looks smooth, but there are some great fact sheets out there that have really good identification characteristics for trees of heaven, but also know like what they're easily confused with in our region, and that'll help you kind of narrow it down.
Awesome. And we can try to find some of those materials and send those out. Are there any plans to control Joro spiders? They have ruined the use of my yard in East Roswell.
I'm so sorry to hear that. My office is in northern Sandy Springs, and so I know, I'm very familiar with how bad they are up there. I don't At this point, we're past eradication. Eradication is no longer an option. I think that they're kind of here to stay. I don't know that Georgia Department of Ag has um, like an aggressive plan in place. I don't know. They may. Our recommendation at the university level is if you eradicate them from your yard, that's going to benefit you because there won't be, they won't be a nuisance to you in your yard, but you're not really putting a dent in the population. So I did have people reach out to me last year like, should I be killing them in my local park? You can if you want to. It's not going to be feasible to fully eradicate them at this point. And so we can manage them locally if they're a nuisance to you, but don't go out of your way killing them thinking you're really like gonna suppress the overall population in Georgia. So to your original question, I don't know what the regulatory plan is for them. I know that at the university level, we're kind of evaluating different control strategies so that we can make recommendations, but not all of that data has come out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If you guys have any other questions or some feedback, please, by all means, go ahead and use the QR codes these on this last slide, and also Gabrielle's contact information. She has been so wonderful to work with for many years, and we're so thankful that you took the time today to share more about the lanternfly. We also will be sending out a survey for you all in addition, and please give us your feedback so we can continue to create educational programs that serve everybody in Atlanta. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Take
Thank
care.
you.